department, we have maybe one, we got 2 applicants.
Sure, and let me get there.
I was under the impression that, Richard, that there was 2 vacancies on that board from Paul Smith.
Let me look. We're at F6.
F6. I know, but it only says 1 in here, but
Who would the other vacancy be? It's quite possible that we didn't get noticed. That the clerk did not know that there's another vacancy, because sometimes the special districts don't always communicate with the clerk about the current status of their board, like we saw some moments ago on the Fish and Game Commission. Yeah.
okay, maybe my impression was wrong.
For sure, though, there is 1 seat,
Yes.
and that 1 seat expires. Oh, that's interesting. So, because there's 2 applications, if it's plausible if there's 2 vacancies, both could be appointed.
Well, I think because there's some confusion on this here, is this one that we can continue to next week?
Let's refer back to the clerk to find out exactly what's going on.
They're very anxious to get it filled. Paul has called a couple of times.
Wow.
Is he calling on?
You want to take up some other items, and we can email the county clerk and find out
Yeah,
what's
let's do that.
Yeah.
And maybe my impression was wrong, but my conversations with Paul made me think that there was 2 board vacancies
Do we know who the other individual was?
that applied, or was
No,
it
that
vacant?
yeah.
No. And I've been to some of their meetings. Is one of these for an alternate?
No.
All we got left, other than our time certainty, is marijuana.
Excuse me.
There are people out here. I think I'm going to go let them know that we're in session. There were several.
You want to just put that off till next Tuesday?
I don't think that's imprudent at all, Mr. Chairman. I think that'd probably be a good idea, and we're not making decisions based on imperfect information.
And if they had an anxious concern about getting it, they would be here and they would have communicated that we need 2 appointments, so we wouldn't be confused.
And I don't know if I just have a misconception, but I was under the impression there was 2. But
For some reason, I thought the same thing.
So,
Just put it off.
I've had several
Madam Clerk,
conversations.
can you tickle that to add to the agenda for next Tuesday? Thank you very much. And in the meantime, we'll find out.
Which brings us, they just start something that can take a long time, but we really have no choice.
There are.
The time Thursday, 11:15.
There is there's H2 and also information for the board, I think, available for the chair to, I1. Not that that's huge, but also H2 that's available. I don't know if Mr. CAO can.
About 30 seconds in a minute.
Yeah, still,
We started an item and recess that item and come back to it.
Sure.
I sent it to you.
Let's get started on H1 then.
Very good.
Then we have to come back to our 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock time certain, 11:15. We get started on it. I think everybody is here, who's going to speak on it is here. Mr. Counsel, would you
Yes.
start off?
You bet. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, H1 is once again a draft ordinance relating to abating nuisances associated with the cultivation of marijuana. Since our last meeting on this topic, which was held at Jensen Hall, which was late in the day, and lots of information received, I did make some changes to, if you recall correctly, there's really 3 components of this draft ordinance. 1 is findings and purpose, 2 is conditions of cultivation, and 3 is everything else which is really associated with enforcement. The only area that I made any real changes to is related to the conditions of cultivation, and that was done with an eye toward following the discussion we had at Jensen Hall last. And so, most specifically, I introduced into the conditions of cultivation a kind of tiered approach to how marijuana would be permitted to be cultivated on lands dependent on the size of the parcel or premises, if you will. And you can see under C, 1, 2, and 3 that those are the tiered approaches that I've taken. C1 relates to essentially parcels of 0 in size up to whatever you set that limit to be. What I have defined in my draft is XXX acres. And in C2, the next tier being parcels that range in size from whatever you define as XXX in size up to YYY in size, a different threshold or a different amount of marijuana that can be cultivated, again, dependent on the size of the parcel. And then in C3, parcels which range from YYY in size and bigger, with no top end. And so that's how I've structured it. I did not insert in there the values for XXX or YYY. What I did do, though, was, and I took a liberty, and I believed, based on the notes I took and listening intently to the conversation by this board at our Jensen Hall meeting last, that there was at least 3 of 5 support for the proposition that in order to effectively deal with what precipitated this matter being brought to this board in the first place, which was cultivation of marijuana outside in densely populated areas, that there might be support by 3 of 5 of you for the purpose of limiting or eliminating, if you will, outdoor cultivation on the smallest of parcels in Lassen County, which typically are found in the densely populated areas like Lake Forest and like Westwood proper and Doyle proper and Title IX and Beaver and the like. That those impacts that would be felt by neighbors, really, in densely populated areas, could be effectively addressed if you just say no outdoor growing on parcels from 0 to whatever number of acres. And the question is what is that number of acres? And so that's C1. C1 specifically addresses, for the small parcels, there'll be no outdoor growing. Indoor growing would be permissible, and in whatever numbers you attach to that. But then when you get to the next level, C2, which would be, from that middle range of parcels, outdoor growing would be permitted in whatever numbers you establish. But there are some limitations on outdoor growing, and it calls for a setback in an amount which you decide, and also a fence to eliminate the view, if you will. And then lastly, C3, the big parcels. The YYY value, whatever size parcel you plug into that and beyond, would essentially be okay to grow outdoors and indoors as well. And so that's how I've approached the tiered, in an attempt to deal with the concerns that were expressed, which caused us to get here in the first place. I listened closely to what Randy had to say. I can't remember his last name, not asking. You wouldn't let somebody on Main Street, Janesville, have 100 cows on a half-acre parcel. So that was persuasive to me, and I think to this board as well. So I've attempted to introduce that in the C1 through 3 approach. Again, what values you plug in there are up to you. All right? The second aspect of changes that were made to the draft ordinance are that in the exclusion zone, no matter what size parcel you have, whether it's 1/4 of an acre or whether it's 2 sections, if you're within XXX number of feet of a school, public park, or licensed daycare facility, you would not be permitted to grow. And I think that was consistent with what this board discussed at last hearing.
Yeah.
And so I have introduced that as well. There may be some wrinkles to that we need to discuss.
Well,
But
I have one I'd
Yes, sir.
like to throw out there, because I think this would be the opportune time to interject it if I may, Mr. Chairman. And that deals with, I think, that when you use the school, churches, and daycare facilities, whatever, can we insert the word existing before that? So existing schools, existing daycare facilities, existing churches, and so forth. And the reason being is at the city council meeting the other night I attended, they found themselves, they're approaching it in the city because they don't have, sections of land where you could have 100 cows and have those kind of comparisons. They're dealing with, they basically are dealing with a lake forest environment throughout the whole city, because that's how the city is. So their dynamics is a lot different than our dynamics. With these, we got 4,500 square miles of, we're huge. And but anyway, the problem they have with their zoning, and I think it's not that we're going to turn this into a zoning, but I think we need to talk about how you basically establish the tiering or priority of rights. So you have a legitimate operator under the context of this ordinance, so that under the C123, okay, they met that. And down the road, somebody comes in and decides to move. Now, schools don't pick up and move very often. And parks and those kind of facilities don't pick up and move very often. Churches will move occasionally, but they don't move very often, especially once they invest in a building. So those are pretty givens. But daycare facilities, daycare operations, pop up and go away and pop up and go away. So they have some mobility. So what would happen to a situation where you have somebody who's legitimately living under the context of this ordinance, and all of a sudden pops up right next door to them is a daycare operation, which now changes the dynamics. And the theory that they were having to deal with, and I think and it came, Kathy Gardner was one of the council members, Mayor Wilson was another one, both had concerns. So we say the reason why we want to create that buffer or barrier between this activity versus those other activities, whatever they may be, is because we don't feel that is a healthy environment. But the thing is that where it's not healthy to have a marijuana operation move in next door to a daycare facility, it's also unhealthy to have a daycare facility move in next door to an existing marijuana thing. So these guys have got a seat at the table now. They have to live by the same rules everybody else lives, and really it's more a function of zoning than planning. But as we deal with the permitting here, the standard is the reason why we don't want these folks to be within 1,000 feet or 500 feet or 50 feet, whatever we said is those barriers and buffers. It has to be true for the others. So in other words, if there's an existing marijuana operation and a church decides to relocate to new facilities and they choose to put themselves right next door to where there's a marijuana garden growing that has been established by right under this ordinance, okay, they do not have to be, it's like moving in next to an airport and saying, now we're going to complain about the airplanes, or move next to a solid waste facility and start complaining about the smell of the solid waste facility. I mean, in other words, I think we have to have some sort of caveat built in there to kind of preclude a legitimate activity that is established by this ordinance being impacted by another activity in the community infringing upon them. So it's a two-way street.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mr. Chairman, because anticipating that...
Well, we had talked about this last week, so
We
I'm
did.
just opening it up.
And
Where did you slip it in at?
I did in item E, in that provision of the conditions of cultivation, which essentially creates the exclusions no matter the size of parcel. And a couple notes. One is churches is not, I did not include churches in the exclusion list. I want to faithfully report to you that I believe that if you include churches in the exclusion list, you will create essentially a no-grow zone in a lot of places, essentially making it impermissible countywide. I don't want to exaggerate, but like Mr. Albaugh suggested, perhaps businesses be included in there. I think again, if you want, I'll put it in there, and we'll go with it. That's one point. The other point is that this exclusion only relates, the way it's drafted, only relates to outdoor growing. Indoor growing would still be permissible within, proximity to those kinds of, school, public park, or licensed daycare facility, and would be okay within the meaning of the ordinance, assuming all of the other conditions of it were fulfilled. But to the point that you bring up, Mr. Supervisor Chapman, there is a couple sentences at the end of E of conditions of cultivation which deal squarely with what you address, and that is the exclusion will not apply, and no abatement shall occur for any marijuana being cultivated within 1,000 feet of a licensed daycare provider when such daycare provider establishes licensure from the state of California subsequent to the first full outdoor growing season and harvest on the subject growing premises. Essentially, what that does is just as you correctly point out, licensed daycare facilities pick up, where or they come into existence much more frequently than public parks and/or schools.
Well, I'm glad to see you gave thought, and I read this. This
Yes.
exactly addresses the concern that we've never really, as a board, have had a discussion. I only became exposed to that as a situation as a result of sitting in and listening to the city council debate and discuss that very issue. And, it comes down to fairness. And we're talking about trying to create an even playing field. This activity has not been one that has been recognized as a legitimate activity for a long time. And so the fact that the laws have changed and now allow these folks to come into the arena and conduct business in the manner in which they've done, we've gone through the whole gamut. There are those within the marijuana community who feel that this is now their right, and that their right basically precludes everybody else's rights. But the reality is, part of the reason why government exists is that we're trying to preserve and protect all the rights of all the people of all the interests of what they're doing, and how they butt up to each other, and the conflicts that are arisen by that will vary, across the landscape. So, but now that you have that right to be able to actively work in this area, to be able to function in this area, now you're going to have to learn how your right, interacts with other people's rights and what that buffers. So just as they are precluded from conducting themselves in certain ways that affect others, others have to also modify their behavior as it affects these people's rights here. And I think that's the balance that has to be attained. And we didn't have that before, and you've done a good job of capturing that. So
Thank you for bringing it to my attention, because I think the fairness issue is something we've strived for from the beginning.
Exactly.
Let's have one public comment from Randy Bluff. Let's take that, and then we're going to recess and go to 11 o'clock and 11:15 items, and we'll come back to this. So I don't know if Randy has time to come back, or so if you don't,
I'd wait until we
I can come back.
get ready.
you want to come back.
Would you like
I don't
to
know when it will be. Whenever you want to.
Yeah.
It could be after lunch if you got 11 o'clock and 11:15.
We've got 2 time certains that we need to deal with.
Doesn't matter either way to me, Mr. Chairman, whatever you think's best. I can do it now or later, or
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
I could maybe bring up a couple points real quick, and then if we run out of time, I can move on and do it later.
Okay.
My name's Randy Bach. I live in Janesville, 462-825 Mountain Way. There's been a lot of issues addressed. Did very well. Appreciate that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I removed the lighting provision as well, and I want to report to the board. There was a prohibition on lighting, I believe, that I had included in this, and it was addressed by Randy Bach and Ted Check, I think, at a previous meeting. and I went back and did a little research on the origin of this ordinance in particular and where I got it from. The lighting issue was something that was unique to Sierra County, and they had received particularized public input from in their process and had been incorporated into this draft. And so based on the public input that we had received, not being aware of any other complaints in our county about people cultivating marijuana using external lighting and offending neighbors, not having received any input, I took the liberty of removing it from this draft and wanted to tell the board that. Sorry to interrupt.
And with the lighting, it's like I was saying before, it's not high intensity, just discharge lights. It's just small, compact fluorescent lights. There's really no fire hazard or anything with that. But just the one problem that I wanted to bring you guys' attention with the indoor cultivation is if you require all cultivation on premises under XX acres to be grown inside, it would cause there to be problems for enforcing agencies of this ordinance to determine if the garden in question is actually out of compliance. Because indoor is not visible, determining compliance becomes very difficult. The reason would be cannabis that is being cultivated inside would require a warrant to gain entry or permission to the residence is denied by the occupant. So if permission to enter the residence is denied, then going about getting permission to enter the residence to check for compliance would cause you to have to get a warrant to do so.
Are you suggesting that we ought to secure a waiver of their Fourth Amendment rights
No.
in advance? I didn't think so.
Not at all.
Just checking.
Yeah, just for the enforcing agencies, just like the last meeting at Jensen Hall, the sheriff had said, you know, you want something plain and simple and able to enforce, where if there's indoor cultivation going on, we're all aware, a lot of people are aware that warrants are needed to enter somebody's dwelling, you know, so if indoor being that way, you think about it, these guys are on 1 acre parcel in Lake Forest doing 99 on 1 acre. They're going to go inside now because they're being forced inside and probably going to do a similar amount, you know, especially because a lot of these guys are a little bit aware about the needing a warrant to enter their residence. Not saying it's for sure everybody would do that, but it is something that a lot of people I'm sure would take advantage of. With that being said, just indoor cultivation makes it really hard. So recommendations for that, if it's greenhouse or outside with a small number of plants, it shouldn't be too much of a nuisance. Smell is always going to be a problem, even if you're growing inside. If you give somebody a legal way to cultivate medicine inside, they're not going to spend thousands of dollars on filtering air and doing stuff like that. So the smell is still going to be there. Outside, you're just still going to deal with the smell as well, but you get rid of the fire risk and you get rid of the no visibility to check compliance. You can see on a small half-acre or 1 acre parcel, you can easily see a greenhouse or a small outdoor setup that you can kind of take a guess on if that would be out of compliance. And just having being able to visibly see it, you wouldn't need a warrant. You know, it's readily apparent probable cause to being out of compliance with the ordinance. During one summer of cultivating, you can cultivate a year worth of medicine. Inside is not the case. Inside, you're going to be producing medicine all year, and that's pretty standard across the board for indoor. It's same plant limits as you can't, like I was saying before, you can't get the intensity from the sun as you can with indoor HID lighting. You're just, yields go down, plant health goes down. A lot more pesticides and chemicals are being used inside than outside, and it all around just doesn't really get rid of the problem of having, we have a problem of summertime growing on these small parcels, but what about all year long if they're growing from January to December, just growing indoor the whole year, and it's a constant smell problem rather than a 2-month smell problem, because cannabis is only smelling from late September into October. You know, that's when you start getting smell from it. So you're dealing with smell for 2 months rather than 12 months. But that's about all I had to say about that. And then just with property line setbacks. Property line setbacks, if say the acreage limits were set at 40 acres for the larger gardens, property line setback should be reasonable for neighbors as well as the farmer. Cannabis, in order to cultivate cannabis property, it has to have adequate sun and it has to have adequate water, and as well as a place that's close enough to be able to provide security for the garden during the growing season. You know, security is a necessary thing doing anything of value. You know, so being that said, if you're on a 40-acre parcel in the mountains or in the foothills, you have very, very, very little room to put gardens to get adequate sun than if you were on a 40-acre parcel in the valley where there's no trees and it's wide open. Just as a recommendation to kind of deal with both the farmer as well as the neighbor, if it was 500 to 600 feet from all dwellings and 75 feet from the property line. Say a dwelling was right near the neighbor's property line, you would still have to be 500 to 600 feet away from that dwelling, so you would still have to go a long ways away. If, say you have really good sun on this one area and that's like the only area that's usable on the 40 acres, and that's kind of the situation that I'm in where I'm at. I'm in the mountains, it goes straight up 2 hillsides, one's west facing, one's east facing, and on the bottom is south facing. That's really, with any farming, you have to have southern exposure to get decent sun. So if it was 500 to 600 feet from all dwellings, even if the neighbor's house was, it's 20-foot setback from property lines for residents, right? Something like that. So even if they were on that 20-foot setback, they would still have to be 5 to 600 feet away. But if the neighbor's dwelling was 500 feet away from their property line, you know, and you were 75 feet away from your property line, you're still that 600 feet away. And I think that kind of deals with the problem of neighbors as well as farmers. And that's all I had to say about it.
Okay, well, you have time to ask one question.
Yeah, I just, the main question I would have for the board is about the acreage limits. Is it going to be set probably less than 40, or is it going to be set over 40 for the larger parcels? And that's just because of property line setbacks. You know, if it was a 40-acre parcel.
That's the magic we haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
We're coming to that today, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
Stick around and we'll all find out together.
Yeah, and one thing too is, especially on small parcels, like Prop 215 guidelines have 6 mature and 12 immature for several reasons. Immature plants do not smell. Seeds are 50-50 male to female, and only the females are used. So if you have a limit of a max of 6 plants on so-and-so acres or down to 0 acres, you basically create a problem where the person can grow these 6 plants but cannot keep a mother plant or cannot produce seeds to be able to get the 6 usable plants. So the reason why Prop 215 has the guidelines of 6 mature and 12 immature is you can plant 12 seeds, but at least 6 of them are going to come out male. So those 6 males are unusable. They're no use of no medical use, of nothing, unless you want to breed and make some more seeds. So then, even then, you would need to keep 1 male, collect pollen, or you would need to collect or keep at least 1 to 2 mothers to be able to cut clones from. So I just wanted to bring that up as a problem, that with these smaller gardens, if there's 6 plants, they would literally have to leave the county every time they harvest, go to a different county, purchase plants from a collective or a dispensary in a different county, and bring the plants back here every time they harvest, if they're not allowed to keep a mother or keep some seeds around, you know? But other than that, that's all I had to bring up.
All right, thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to recess from marijuana and go to D1, 11 o'clock, planning and billing service department. Morris, you got to get your staff back to work.
Pardon me?
You need to get the staff back to work.
Yeah, no, I was just getting educated. Every time that gentleman talks, I feel like I'm in a classroom.
I think we've all learned a lot from it.
Yeah, no, very intelligent. Okay, so, right, what you retain. So, before you right now, and I want to make sure I'm looking at 11 o'clock, it was the last one, right? Yeah, so You have a resolution of the Lassen County Board of Supervisors requesting that the Lassen County Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, take proceedings for the dissolution of the County Service Area Number 2, which was the Johnsonville Water System. Board will recall the direction was to dispose of.
I think we're on a different item.
Yeah, I think you've made an error. The 11 o'clock is not in fact the LAFCO issue. That's the 11:15.